Lloyd, Ruhl, aka MegaBlitzz. In today's video, we're going to be giving a tier list of all the Paradox Rift decks right now. And I'm really excited to do this because this will be the first tier list I've ever done. Not only that, I was going to do this originally like 2 weeks ago, but I kind of waited because we had 2 regionals going on. We had the Gdansk regionals and the Brisbane regionals, and I really wanted to see what those brought to the table before doing this tier list. And I'm glad I did, because I feel like had I done this 2 weeks ago, some decks would be placed very differently than where they should be right now, and where I feel like they are. So I'm glad I did wait. Before we jump into that tier list, though, don't forget to leave a like, smash that subscribe button, because I really do appreciate all of your guys' support. All right, let's jump right into this tier list. Alright, guys, and here we are with that tier list. Before we get into the tier list here, huge shout out to Zapdos TCG for providing this tier list, everybody, and letting everyone use it. Really do appreciate it. So definitely check out his channel. I'll make sure to put his channel in the description below as well, so if you want to see all of his content, you'll be able to. All right, let's start off with the don't play these. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this just because they're bad. They're not ready. They don't have the cards they need. They don't have the tech cards. They're not positioned that great in the format and things of that nature. So Mewtwo EX with Xatu, Kafagrigus. Sadly, Aegis Slash has to be down here. It's too matchup dependent, I feel like, this problem. And that's kind of its issue. Meowscles EX, Dialga V-Star, and Skeledirge EX as well. United Wings, and United Wings I thought about putting in tier 3, but United Wings, the good matchups it has aren't really that good right now. So sadly, it's got to go down here and don't play this, and this Garbodor Rug Trio deck have to go down here. So now, moving up to our tier 3 here, we got quite a bit to go over. We got Banette EX in tier 3. I think Banette EX is a very cool deck. I just think that there's better control variants to play. The only reason Banette EX is in tier 3 and not don't play this is because you're able to get a lot of knowledge with Poltergeist and be able to potentially do a lot of damage with it as well, especially if you're going against decks like Snorlax Stall that are packed with trainer cards in them. So for those reasons, Banette EX is in tier 3. Garchomp EX is in tier 3. The only reason I'm putting Garchomp EX in tier 3 is because I think right now it doesn't have the tools it needs, but it has more than the decks that are in don't play this. So for that reason, Garchomp EX got to go in tier 3. It's playable, but it's not good. Goldango EX, I think Goldango is not a very great deck. When Goldango came out, everybody was like, Goldango's gonna be so good, the coin bonus and make it rain, and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty unique. You don't have to use rare candy anymore, but you don't really have any like backup attackers. Like your best backup attacker is probably Scizor right now, and even that is kind of okay, I guess, at best. And you do less damage than you do with Chien-Pao, and you're not, and like Path of the Peak just shuts off your coin bonus draw effects. So you're kind of in a position where you have to play the Barrel like Chien-Pao does, but you can't pull off cross-switch or canceling clone plays and play Iron Hands in the deck like Chien-Pao can. So for those reasons, Goldango's got to be down here. Serena EX. Now, Serena EX has done fairly okay on the online scene, but that's about it. It hasn't really done any better than that. I don't see this deck doing very well at all, and in in-person events, I don't think it's going to do very well. Moving forward, sometimes you can lock your opponent out of the game. Sure, you got the panic masks and all that stuff. I totally get it. But it's really difficult to pull that off, and I think that's where Serena EX kind of falls off here. We got Zorobox in tier 3. Right there. Sorry. Zorobox in tier 3. The problem with Zorobox is it's very setup dependent. You really need to get your Zoroarks evolved. You really need to get the refinement package rolling. You really got to get the prereq stage 1s in the discard pile. And you really got to think multiple turns ahead. Sure, you have so many answers to different decks. And I truly think that Zorobox is probably the best budget deck to be playing right now. But it's not competitive viable. It's just not, sadly. Regigigas, kind of the same problem. I think Regigigas is a good budget deck. However, Regigigas' problem is that it's never going to be able to live up to what it was. Once the special energies that Regigigas had rotated out, you got forced to play all these basic energies, which sure, Earthen Vessel kind of helps out a little bit, but it's just never going to be able to live up to what it was. It's never going to be as consistent, and sadly, Regi's is kind of just fallen off. I'm sorry for the Regi lovers out there. Mimikyu. V-Union Control. Sorry, guys. It's just not good. It's not a good deck. There's better control decks to play. It's a very niche deck. It's very specific. And it's kind of linear as a control deck, which is weird to say. Now, we got our Xander Wojcik piles. Now, Xander Wojcik is very much known for cooking up these crazy control decks, but they're not for the average player. And what I mean by the average player is I've been playing Pokemon competitive for probably about a year or two now, and I've tried to play these decks, and man, I have no idea what's even happening. They're so complex. They're so difficult to pull off. And for Xander Wojcik, if this was Xander making this video, it's up here every time. But not everybody knows how these decks work, and you really need to know every single matchup that you're playing. And for those reasons, I have to put it down here in Tier 3. Arceus Regidrogo V-Star. Arceus Regidrogo V-Star is a really cool deck, and it's very unique. You're able to pick a bunch of different dragon type dragon attacks out of your discard pile. Giratina V-Star, Goodra, Altaria. You can pick all these different attacks, which is great. However, the problem that Regidrogo V-Star has is the fact that it's not consistent, and it's not the best Arceus deck. If you're playing an Arceus deck, just play like Arcdura or Arctina. They're just better. So for those reasons, it has to go down here. Lost Zone Goodra. As much as I hate to say it, I like Lost Zone Goodra. I love Goodra V-Star. I think it's a really cool Pokemon. I think it's a really cool Pokemon card. And I've been loving playing Lost Box variants lately. But sadly, Lost Box Goodra is just not what it was. Sure, you can heal damage and stuff off your Pokemon, but with Roaring Moon being a thing and Anti-Iron Valiant being a thing, Goodra just can't hit that big one-hit KO that it needs to hit, like decks like Lost Tina can, or Lost Zone Roaring Moon can. And that's the problem right now with Lost Goodra, is the fact that its damage is just a little too lackluster, and taking 80 less from attacks, or even just healing the damage off, doesn't really matter, especially with Roaring Moon being relatively played recently, and it's pretty okay of in a deck. So for those reasons, Lost Zone Goodra's gotta go down here. Meowscarada EX. It's a cool deck. I thought about putting it in Tier 2, but I have to put it in Tier 3. And the reason I have to put it in Tier 3 is because your only really okay matchups is against Roaring Moon, because you can hit it for weakness, and Charizard, because you can hit Charizard for weakness. But other than that, this deck's really bad. It's not that good. It's not really consistent. It's okay against single prize decks because you can, like, put damage counters and stuff, but that's about it. You can't really benefit from, like, Yoga Loop, really. I guess you could play Yoga Loop in the deck and play, like, some DTEs and stuff, but then, I don't know, I feel like if you're going to play a deck that's doing damage counters and trying to use the Yoga Loop combo, just play Rapid Box or just play Anti-Iron Valiant. They're just better decks. So, sadly, Meowscarada's going to go down here, and I love Meowscarada. It is my favorite starter out of all the Paldeana starters between, like, Skeledirge, Quaxoval, and Meowscarada. I think Meowscarada is definitely the coolest, but gotta go down there. Tinglu, kind of in the similar boat. It gets shut off the path of the P like Meowscarada does, and your Tinglu's in a weird position, right? Because Switch Card kind of just counters what you're doing. If you can't get a Gapejaw Bog to stick, you're kind of unlucky. And, well, you're forced to play things like Koraidon and Gutsy Pickaxe and Tinglu, and that's not great. And right now, there's not really a whole lot of normal type decks that are very viable that you can prey the weakness on. Sure, there's Snorlax Stall, but they're just going to boss up your Koraidons and a bunch of other stuff and just stall you out of the game. And that's about it. So you can kind of do okay with it because you can shut off the block ability with Tinglu, but they're just going to pick it up with Penny. And then you're kind of just stuck there. So for those reasons, Tinglu's got to go down here. It's just not super great, and it's kind of in a weird position, and the deck's really clunky. All right. Sadly, Armarouge EX has got to go down here in Tier 3. I like Armarouge EX. I think it's a really cool Pokemon. I think the card's really awesome. And man, Molly, please stop. It's a really cool Pokemon, and I love it. And I love Firebox decks. I just wish that we had more tools for it. but we don't yet, and that's okay. But in time, we will. So, for your Armor Rouge Firebox believers out there, don't give up hope. It'll come. All right, moving up here into our Tier 2 decks. We got Arc Dura. Now, Arc Dura it's a good deck. It's okay. People will continue to play it because they're Arc Dura believers and they're Arc Pile believers, and that's okay. That's great. But the reason Arc Dura has to be down here in Tier 2, and I cannot move it up any further at all, is because the only decks you're really good against is Lugia, and man, Lugia sucks right now. So, sadly, it's got to hang out down here in Tier 2. I would like to put... Oh, I want this on this side, sorry. Rapid Box. I think Rapid Box is a pretty okay deck right now. You're still able to pull off some pretty cool plays with Metacham and such. Double Gunner's really good. Gmax Rapid Flow is insane. It's rather easy for you to beat Miraidon, I feel like, because Gmax Rapid Flow is going over the place and hitting things for weakness and Double Gunners and such. It's really strong. It's really good. But Rapid Box problem is the fact that Entei Iron Valiant exists, and it's just more consistent and it's faster. The other issue with Rapid Box is the fact that Path to the Peak makes it really difficult for you, and if you can't get your Remoraid's and your Octilleries rolling, then, well, you're kind of just out of luck, and that's unfortunate. Alrighty, we got Arctina. Now, Arctina is also a deck that I feel like people will continue to play because it's Arctina, and Arctina is really fun. It was the first Arceus deck I ever played. It's really easy to pick up and play, and you're able to tech Superior V-Star into it to deal with Charizard. However, the problem with Arctina is the fact that it's not good. And the reason it's not good is because it's really inconsistent sometimes, and your biggest upside of the deck is the fact that you can just judge path your opponent after you start birth. If you go first playing Arctina, you're in a pretty good boat. But if you go second, well, not so much. And if you can't Trinity Charge on your first turn playing like if you go second and you can't Trinity Charge and load up on a Giratina V, man, it feels really bad. And you're kind of just sitting there like a dead duck. You're just hanging out, and it feels really bad. Palkia V-Star, I feel like it's got to be down here in Tier 2. There are a variants of it that are playing Ice Rider Calyrex, but even then, I feel like it's still Tier 2 at best. The Ice Rider include is really cool, and I do like it. However, the problem with Palkia is the fact that Miraidon is good, and Miraidon is really good right now. So, if you have a Palkia V just hanging out on your bench, and they're able to pull off in turn 1 Iron Hands EX attack, they're taking 3 prizes. That's the problem with it. Moving into that's the exact same problem that both of our Lugia decks have. Lugia's problem is that Miraidon is crazy good right now. Iron Hands makes it that much worse for them. Plus, Lugia is in a position too where you're so turn 1 dependent, and if you can't go first, you're kind of just unlucky. And with decks like Roaring Moon out, that's also not super great for us. Also, if your Archeops get KO'd, you're kind of out of the game. And the fact that Miraidon has Iron Hands in it, they can just go boss up your Archeops, amp you very much, take 2 prizes off of a single prize Archeops, which is really insane to think about. Cloth Electrode is another deck that is just, it's a meme deck, but it's a good meme deck. And what I mean by that is the fact that Cloth hits all of your Arceus piles, and it can hit Snorlax for weakness. And since it plays Electrode V, you're hitting Charizard EX for weakness and Roaring Moon for weakness. So for those reasons, it's in Tier 2. Its mechanics really fun, and I like the deck a lot. It's really cool, but I feel like Tier 2 is kind of where it's going to be, and I think it's going to be at the bottom of Tier 2. Zoroark V-Star is another just Tier 2 deck. I think it's okay in our format right now, but the fact that you're putting damage counters on yourself is not super great, especially with all the Yoga Loop stuff going on, and there's still Lost Box decks running around out there, and you got Chien-Pao being able to just Greninja a bunch of stuff, and Charizard being able to just continually do more damage over time, so they'll be able to actually take KOs earlier on your Zoroark V-Stars, and you have things like Cloth and Ting-Lu that you're instantly just weak to, and people are starting to tech Minior into the deck to deal with Snorlax, and that's going to put Zoroark V-Star really down in the dumper. Now, Roaring Moon is another deck that I think is going to cause a lot of controversy here. if you're talking about towards Lost Box Roaring Moon deck, 100% tier 2. I think the deck was very cool, but it's very situational in a lot of things, and it's really spread in a bunch of weird ways. But if put in the right hands, can be very good. And Torch showed us that, taking it to 5th place. Now, Turbo Roaring Moon, I feel like, is also in tier 2. I feel like it's a little bit higher than the Lost Zone Roaring Moon deck. But Roaring Moon's problem is the fact that you're so turn 1 setup dependent, and if you can't get it, you're kind of just out of luck. And Frenzy Gouging is a really cool attack because you can take instant KOs on things like Gudra, which is why it's not good, and things of that nature. However, the problem with it is that you eat 200 damage, and if you don't have the capsule on it, well, you're sitting at 30 HP, and if you do have the capsule on it, you're still sitting at 270, which isn't super great, because then Greninja can just go bonk bonk and take a KO off something else and then put damage counters on maybe another Roaring Moon so you can't Frenzy Gouging with it. So for those reasons, Roaring Moon's got to be down here. Lost Zone Sablezard. Now, Lost Zone Sablezard is a really unique deck, and I think it could potentially be tier 1 just because it has Radiant Charizard. However, Jirachi is really difficult for Lost Box decks to overcome sometimes. But the nice thing about Lost Zone Sablezard is the fact that you don't have any Pokemon V you really have to worry about, so it's all single prize attackers. So your opponent has to take multiple KOs to win the game. But Lost Zone Sablezard is, I would probably say, an okay Lost Box deck. I think there's just better Lost Zone decks to be playing right now, and I don't think Lost Sablezard is where it needs to be in our format. Moving into our other Lost Zone decks, we got Turbo Lost Box with Kyogre. Now, Turbo Lost Box is also in a position where I think that it's an okay position, but its problem is the fact that Jirachi counters Sableye, and Manaphy counters Kyogre. Molly, please quit. So, it's one of those just unfortunate things where you're countered on both ends, and you have to deal with one to be able to attack with the other, and you got to be able to attack with the other to deal with the other one, and it's just, it's too much for Lost Box to be able to overcome. Dragonite's a really good Pokemon, but with the Yoga Loop stuff going around, you don't really want to be putting damage counters on your stuff with Dragonite, so that's kind of where it's at, and Lost Box isn't really a good, or sorry, Lugia is not really a good deck right now, so you can prey on that with your Raikos. So Lost Zone Turbo Box is just not where it needs to be. Now, what I feel like is probably the worst Lost Box deck to be playing out of these three right here is Lost Zone Charizard EX. I think Lost Zone Charizard EX is probably the worst Charizard EX variant you can play, and it's not quite the worst Lost Box decks because we got Lost Zone Gudra down here. However, Lost Zone Charizard EX is just not that good. I feel like there's just a better Charizard EX variant out there. Even Charizard Barbarrel's better, Charizard Pidgeot's better, and that's just what it is, guys, unfortunately. Moving into our tier 1 here, we got Charizard Pidgeot, and the reason Charizard Pidgeot's in tier 1 is because Quick Search is just too good. Being able to get whatever card you want is really nice. However, the things that it struggles against is the fact that Snorlax Stall can really put you out of the game because they can just put up a bunch of other Pokemon and just Erica's Invitation, pull down a Pokemon, put it up in the active spot. And Charizard EX doesn't play a lot of like switch effects really. And I think Charizard is going to be a really good I think it's going to be a really good deck. And Charizard EX is a really strong Pokemon card. However, its issue is really also Path to the Peak. Path to the Peak completely shuts off Charizard EX. It shuts off Infernal Rain, it shuts off Quick Search with Pidgeot EX. So you really need to make sure that Path to the Peak isn't on the field when you go to evolve into your Charizard EX, or if you need to Quick Search, you need to bump that Path to the Peak first. But you can do that by attacking with Pidgeot. However, that's not always able to happen. Chien-Pao EX with Baxcalibur. I also think Chien-Pao EX with Iron Hands. This is just kind of talking about like both decks here. I think both are in tier 1. I think both decks are very viable. I think the cross-switcher canceling Cologne combo without Iron Hands is really strong because you can just prey on like Gardevoir right now and just be like, all right, boss up Manaphy, cross-switcher up Manaphy, canceling Cologne, KO that in Acrylia. And then if they try to do it back, you're just like, all right, well, I'll just do it a second time, hopefully. And if they can't get the Manaphy back, then you can just power up your Greninja again and take 2 more KOs on their Curlias, potentially. So for those reasons, and you're able to get really high knockouts with Chien-Pao EX. So Chien-Pao EX, with or without Iron Hands, is still really good. I think they're tier 1. The only thing that Chien-Pao EX has a problem with is the fact that Brick Hands are really bad to deal with, and they're really difficult sometimes to overcome. Now, I think Iron Valiant EX is probably going to be top of tier 1, and the reason I think it's going to be top of tier 1 is because Noah Sawyer took this thing all the way to 2nd place and absolutely showed people that this deck is something to be feared with. And the reason it's so good is because you can play so many switch effects. Jet Energy, Rope, Switch Cart, Switch. So you have all these switch effects to be able to get all your Tachyon bits off, and then you're able to just Metachamp Yoga Loop, and then potentially even take another KO with Entei V in the deck as well by playing Magma Basin. The deck is really strong. It's really good. And I think that this deck will be a force to be reckoned with. Right now, its problem is Noah Sawyer is the only list we have to go off of. And I think that's the only downside it has. But I think Noah Sawyer's list is actually incredible. I had played this for the first time and did okay with it. However, now that I've played a couple more times after that, I really have a good understanding of this deck. I actually had played against it with a Snorlax Stall deck and won it by playing Snorlax Stall and beat an Iron Valiant deck. Had my opponent maybe been a little bit more considerate of their switch effects that they had, I think they've been okay. I think Entei Iron Valiant, just people need to learn how to play their matchups right now, and I think once people learn how the matchups play out, I think it'll be a really good deck. All right, we got both of our Mew decks here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Mew is Mew. Mew is good. It's got Meloetta for the Fusion one, and then you got the DTE version with Grabber, and then it just has Judge Path. So it's Judge Path and just disrupt your opponent and take huge KOs, and Mew is just going to be here, guys. Charizard's out, and it should be able to deal with it. Roaring Moon should be able to deal with it. Like, Drapion's a card, but it still gets around these anyway. So Mew is just going to keep doing Mew things, and that's where we're going to have to be here. Now, at the bottom of our tier 1, we got Lost Tina. Now, the only reason Lost Tina is in tier 1 and not tier 2, where all the other Lost Zone decks kind of end up being, is because Giratina V-Star. Giratina V-Star is able to use its huge Star Requiem attack to take big KOs and knock out anything in the format right now. So if you're going against Mew, Star Requiem, KO it, take 3 prize cards. It's pretty strong. But the other thing that Lost Tina has going for it is that it's 50-50 against pretty much every single matchup in the meta right now. You don't really have anything that's like super favorable, but you don't really have anything that's like very unfavorable. You're kind of just like the average deck. You're the solid pick going to pretty much any event right now. I feel like you're 50-50 across everything. So Lost Tina is just one of those like comfort picks, I feel like. Now moving into our S tier decks, Gardevoir EX, I feel like, is still gonna be S tier. And the reason it's in S tier is because Gardevoir EX, it's consistent, it's able to just really disrupt your opponent with late game Ionos and Averys and things of that nature. And it's able to bump path relatively reliably. And Gardevoir EX, its big attackers are single prizers. They have single prizers that can KO things that are at like 280 hit points, which is insane to me. And it's able to get around a lot of the counters right now. So yes, sure, Jirachi counters Cresselia, but Jirachi doesn't counter Screamtail. So Screamtail gets countered by Manaphy, but Cresselia doesn't get countered by Manaphy. So Gardevoir is in this position where you're forcing your opponent to put both of them out. And let's say they do put both of them out. Well, they're clogging up 2 bench spots right now to counter your Cresselia and Screamtail. You're like, okay, I'm just going to take big KOs on your EXs and your Vs and such with my baby Gardevoir. And that's it. Like, the deck is just good. I also think Miraidon right now is definitely S tier. Getting the include with Iron Hands was making this deck absolutely incredible. Being able to just completely push Lugia out of the format with it. Being able to prey on Lost Box decks with it and take extra prizes that way. Puts Miraidon in a really good spot. It makes your Gardevoir matchup a little bit easier as well, because Iron Hands just let you take extra prizes, and being able to just amp you very much for 120 it's too good. It just is. And for our last deck here, we got Snorlax Stall. Now, Snorlax Stall is an S tier strictly because it has gotten some of the most insane includes for this list. Counter Catcher, Luxurious Cape, you know, and then you have even cards before that with Erica's Invitation from 151. This deck is insane to play. You're able to really lock your opponent out of the game and then just kind of mill them out with Crabominable or just have them deck themselves. And the best part about it is, well, a lot of your Pokemon are single prize attackers. You got Mimikyu in there to be able to deal with EXs and Vs. You got Snorlax with the block ability. The only Vs you have are Rotom and Crabominable. And Pidgeot V, but Pidgeot V, you're just using it for Forest Steel Stone and then shuffling it back into your deck so you can't deck yourself. And that's why Snorlax is so good right now, is because you can deck your opponent, but you can't deck yourself, because if they don't have if there isn't a Path of the Peak out, you can just cycle that Pidgeot V over and over and over again. And that's the best part about it. So for those reasons, Snorlax Stall has to go in S tier. I think right now in a best of 3 format, Snorlax Stall is a force to be reckoned with. So let's jump right into that outro. Alrighty guys, that was absolutely tons of fun to be able to put this tier list together. This was my first tier list, and well, I think I might do more of these in the future, because truly this was fun just to be able to talk about all these different decks and my thoughts and opinions and where I feel like they're at in the meta and their pros and their cons. It was really awesome. Once again, shout out to Zapdos TCG for providing this tier list. Really do appreciate it. If you haven't yet, don't forget to leave a like, smash the subscribe button. I really do appreciate all of your guys' support. Alright, I'll see you in the next one. Peace!